Well, love what Rice says at the bottom of 101. If love is the most fundamental quality of God's character, and I might even put it more strongly, I might say that God's character is love, um, and that whatever else we say regarding God would have to be filtered through that fundamental claim. Then we should look to love to explain why God created and what sort of world God made. It's a good sentence. Creation brings to expression the love that God intrinsically is. Well, there it is, intrinsically is. Accordingly, God loves the world that God created, and God created a world that could return God's love. God made creatures who could appreciate and respond to God's love for them. To do this, however, their love and loyalty had to be voluntary. This is a nice footnote from Gregory Boyd at the bottom there. This is the basic scenario that all who subscribe to the free will defense accept. I won't go further into that. I think you begin to split hairs if you say, well, God didn't know the future when God created, but had in mind to create a world of relative freedom or agency for creatures, but didn't know that it would turn out so badly. I mean, you do get a little of that biblically in Genesis early, when right before the flood we read that the Lord was sorry, regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and sort of repented of that decision, which can only imply that they'd gotten way worse than God anticipated. Nonetheless, I mean, it's kind of hard to imagine a world in which this creaturely agency just never would be. It could have been a world where human beings would never commit sin, never pursue their own way. We certainly don't think, well, it's only because the first ones did that we do. It's if you can argue back. Well, even if we take Adam and Eve like as straightforwardly literal figures, and they lived, let's say they never fell, they just hung out in the garden. Of course, one could ask, would they have repopulated the earth in that case? But let's say yes, and would all the generations subsequent also just be righteous? And it's all rather imaginative, I think. So it's probably closer to the truth to suggest that the God who is love and who has called forth a world where response to that love is authentic, where the human creatures really do have an actual response to offer, that's going to be a world that gets pretty ambiguous pretty quick, pretty dicey. Sin is always too close. We quote God talking to Cain, sin is lurking at the door, and its desire is to overtake you, but you must master it. Even there, that's a great open theology text, right? God speaking to Cain in a way that, as far as the biblical text is concerned, God doesn't know what Cain is going to do. God has real hopes, and God can lay out the options. If you do well, will you not be accepted? But if not, look out. Sin lies at the door like a lion, and its desire is for you, but you must master it, Cain. So somebody not mastering it would have happened sooner or later, and probably sooner than later. And so that's all to say, a free will defense that's sort of predicated on the idea that God created a world out of freedom for freedom and to express freely its love back to God, always and everywhere, throughout eternity. And therefore this would be sort of unexpected on God's part. Well, I didn't really want all this evil to happen. I think that's kind of a fantasy position. Now, let's move it right along here. I thought of a couple things. I want to talk now more about the free will, the openness position. Here's a fun text for you. Besides the one that I already mentioned from Genesis, where, it just says outright that God looked at how bad the world had gotten and went, boy, I'm going to have to reboot this thing. And at first God says, I'm going to destroy everything, every living creature, including all the people. And then God doesn't do that, which means apparently the future wasn't perfectly known by God, including even God's own actions, because when the Lord smells the soothing aroma of the sacrifice, we're told, he kind of goes like, now I get it. That somehow in that sacrificial smoke, perhaps, who knows, maybe the text is suggesting that God got a whiff of the kind of, smoking meat, going out for the kill, I don't know. Equally, though, the book of Genesis has a little later that very famous story of Abraham and Isaac. And I can't build a whole theology on this, but, as Moses takes his son up to the mountain and is ready to offer him up, here we have it. Abraham. And he said, Abraham said, here I am, Hineni. I know the Hebrew there, Hineni, here I am. The angel of the Lord said, do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Now I know that you fear God. I think I might even mention that in the story of God. I'm not sure. But it wouldn't have been necessarily anything I gave for you to read. So that's an interesting thing. But check out this language now from Exodus. I'm just going to do a few biblical texts for you that I would be surprised if any of these didn't show up in some of the more prominent texts in open theology. In Exodus chapter 13, this is a favorite of mine. Exodus chapter 13, beginning at 17. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines. Although that was nearer, that would have been the more direct route. For God thought, if the people face war, they may change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people by the roundabout way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea. Now, we don't get any notion that God knew that would be the case. And you get into all kinds of quandaries if you say that you can make the idea that God knows all the future fit a text like this, where God says, man, if they face war, they might change their minds. That's not the language of, I know the future and I know how to bring about what I desire. It's more, there's a little bit more of a cooperative notion there. Of course, the Bible's filled with stories of the Jewish people not cooperating so very well, as well as cooperating. But one of my favorites is some of the stuff in Jeremiah. And I don't have all the texts that I'd like to share. I'm just going to do some representative ones. But, Jeremiah has become rather we'll say, well known for the line, I think it might be in chapter 29, some of you know. For I know the plans I have for you, something like that, O Israel. Plans not to destroy, but to, whatever it is. It's nice. But here's part of the deal. That's interesting language. Now, if we just take it on the human level first, if I say to somebody, I know the plans that I have for you, my plan for my daughter, I know the plans I have for you. I'm planning that you will go to college and graduate. I'm planning that you will meet, a wonderful boy during your time in college. Plans, or I could say, well, Janice and I are planning to take a trip next summer, big road trip. We're planning this. The only reason anybody makes plans, right, is that they don't know the future, and they do assume that the future is not written in stone already. That's what a plan is. We make a plan. Now, I grant that we may not be able to make an easy transition from the idea of a human being making a plan to the idea of God making a plan, as though God is equally unclear about the future. But let's at least notice that the way we usually use this phrase does not at all suggest a certainty, but rather God's good intentions, that God makes a plan. It can easily be argued, that the analogy between human and God, breaks down very quickly, including in this regard, that a human being makes a plan because they don't really know the future. They're trying to plan it out to some extent. And that God would be different because what God plans will happen because God planned it. I'm going to stop here right now before I take us back to Jeremiah to look at a few texts that sort of might challenge that idea.